Hello, I'm Mike Pirro, Superintendent of Pittsford Schools. I have Mike Vespi here with me, Assistant Superintendent for Business. We are here today to provide you with information on the initial budget forecast for the 2025-26 fiscal year, and we ask for your assistance in helping Pittsford Schools obtain more financial support from New York State. Mike is going to provide you with a history and overview of how New York State's foundation aid was created. I am going to provide you with an update on how foundation aid could potentially help impact our financial future with your support.
Back in the 90s, there was a lawsuit called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. In that lawsuit, the assertion was made that New York State was underfunding public education. For about 20 years, the lawsuit went back and forth through the courts, and in 2006, after a lengthy appeal process, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity was victorious. The final ruling required New York State to increase funding to public schools based on a study of funding successful schools. This also resulted in the creation of what's now known as the foundation aid formula, based on the 2007 Education Budget Format legislation, which required New York State to provide billions of additional funds to public schools phased in over a 5-year period from 2007 to 2012. Unfortunately, in 2008, one of the worst financial crises hit our nation and really impacted New York State. So the full phase in of the foundation aid was delayed, and in fact, New York State took actions to reduce state aid from school districts. This legislation created terms like the Deficit Reduction Act and then the Gap Elimination Adjustment to combat the financial crisis. The school district lost funding and was forced to make budget reductions. This impacted Pittsford schools from 2010 to 2015. On top of that, in 2011, New York State implemented a tax cap to limit school districts' ability to raise funds through taxation. As state aid was cut, schools were relying heavily on increased tax levies, so the tax cap was New York State's reaction to that. From 2012 to 2021, Pittsford schools had over $100 million withheld in what should have been legally mandated foundation aid funding increases. Most school districts were fully funded between 2016 and 2019. Pittsford was fully funded in 2024. This delay was due to the wealth factors used in the calculation of the foundation aid formula. The future challenge is now that Pittsford Schools has received the fully phased-in amount of foundation aid, New York State has returned to its old ways and provided Pittsford Schools with an increase of just over $10,000 in new foundation aid in the current year's budget. Essentially, that revenue source has been frozen again. If this continues, it will create a financial hardship for the district, as revenue growth will not keep up with expected spending. This will cause extreme financial challenges when trying to maintain current programs and services. In summary, we are in an unprecedented school finance situation now. Our main revenue source is capped, and state support is frozen, with little hope for changes in the tax cap or foundation aid formula. This isn't just an issue with Pittsford schools. This will impact school districts all over New York State.
Thank you, Mike. School budgets can be complicated to try to understand, so I'm going to try to do my best to simplify this for you. I ask that you think about your own expenses as I illustrate our sources of revenue. For many homes, the largest source of revenue is their salary from a job. For our district, the largest source of revenue is the tax cap levy, meaning the money we collect from our taxpayers, which accounts for approximately 71% of money coming in. Possibly similar to your income, our levy has been capped, resulting in approximately a 1.4% increase over the last couple of years, despite inflation. In other words, costs have increased while our levy growth has lagged. To use another analogy, some of you may be collecting Social Security as a source of income. In our world, I would liken this to our foundation aid. We have labeled the foundation aid as frozen because essentially we do not have any positive direction from the state on any future increases. As Mike discussed, the district received a little over $10,000 in additional foundation aid last year. Since 21% of the district's revenue comes from state aid, this simply isn't enough to support budget increases, especially since we expected to receive about $600,000 more in foundation aid this past year. This is like you expecting a certain amount in your Social Security check, but you receive less. So if I were to pause for a second, just to recap, our tax cap levy is capped and our foundation aid is frozen. Both are volatile in nature. The other challenge that we have is that $6 million in federal COVID stimulus funds have been fully and appropriately spent. This was an unprecedented amount of federal support, and while we appreciate it, some of the issues from COVID still persist in our schools. We now need to find a way to use local and state dollars to support the value-added programs that were implemented during the past 4 years. Some positive news is that we're being supported by Monroe County with increases from sales tax. We are doing very well on our investments based on interest earnings. We have healthy reserves and fund balances, and in general, our district finances are very healthy right now. The biggest challenge is that revenue is not projected to keep up with budget increases. On an annual basis, we can expect the budget to grow by 4%, or approximately $6.4 million. Currently, we are projecting our revenues to grow by $4.9 million when considering the tax cap, expenditure drive aids, the use of additional reserves, and no new significant foundation aid support from New York State. This leaves us with a projected budget gap of about $1.5 million. As I previously mentioned, projected expenses will exceed revenue. We are losing the support of $6 million of stimulus money. We have increased costs due to inflation, and basically, just the nature of doing business costs more everywhere. As you see in your own personal budgets, travel, supplies, materials, insurance costs, and energy expenses are all increasing. Additionally, we have had significant increases for mental health and special education services in the past few years. Another point to keep in mind is that Pittsford Schools receives the lowest amount of foundation aid per student in the Monroe County. That's $3,772 per student as compared to $10,577 per student in the lowest wealth district. When all was said and done, the $10,000 Pittsford Schools received in new additional foundation aid this year equates to approximately $1.75 per student. As we move forward, the good news is that we've already reduced our deficit by about $5 million from earlier budget forecast predictions. As we begin to look at our initial 25-26 budget, the current projected deficit is $1.5 million. As I previously mentioned, we've got strong sales tax, investment income, and healthy savings accounts along with fund balances. The tough news is that we still must find about $1.5 million in reductions to balance the budget for next year. It's also a good news, bad news situation to use additional money from our savings account, which is expected to total about $1.2 million more in the 25-26 budget. As you know, using a savings account for recurring annual expenses is not a sustainable budget practice without identifying a revenue source to replenish savings when it's fully used. So what do we need to do from here? We will need to be working with the district's planning team to prioritize budgetary expenses, to find the areas of greatest savings, while at the same time minimizing the impact on our programs and services. We'll also be looking to manage staff reductions through attrition as staff members retire. And finally, we need to advocate for our fair share of funding from New York State. So we are asking for your assistance. Please consider being part of an advocacy campaign effort by writing letters to local legislators to let them know how important it is for Pittsford Schools to receive its fair share of additional foundation aid. If you visit the URL listed here, you'll find a sample letter as well as contact information for the elected officials who represent us in Albany. If New York State agreed to provide us with an increase of 3%, this would generate over $600,000 in additional foundation aid money. These funds will go a long way to help us close the projected budget gap in the 2025-26 budget. Thank you.